Episode 64, Money and Risk with Shubert.
Ask, how does this feel when I do this? And try to dig up a little bit of understanding about yourself and your stories around money. The earlier you can do this, the better off you're going to be, because then the more rational and functional your decisions around money are going to be.
Welcome, fellow STEM enthusiasts, to the STEM Southwest podcast, your source for all things science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. This podcast is designed to create STEM connections, cohesion, and elevation. This is a place where STEM enthusiasts gather to learn about some amazing STEM rock stars and activities of the Southwest and beyond that are impacting the world. If you have longed to be united with your fellow STEM nerds, then you've found your people here at STEM Southwest. And now, here are your hosts, Bob and Shelley.
Hey everyone, this is Bob.
And I'm Shelley.
And together we are
STEM Southwest.
So Shelley, if anybody knows how my mind works, it's you, and you don't even know half the time how I arrive from point A to point C, D, whatever you want to call it. So this last week I've been listening to a lot of music, and it's really generated a lot of thinking on my mind, reflecting on places that we've been, places that I want to visit. And one of the big stopping points in the past has been lack of funds to do it on a regular basis. And I'm glad to say that over the last, 5-6 years, our money life is on track. We're moving forward. I can see in my mind when I'm going to take that step, where I'm going to reduce my work life and do more of the things that I've been putting off. And that's really kind of what got me excited about this interview we just had with Shubert about money and planning and just how do we do that better in our lives and not let just the day-to-day take over, and that by the time we're in our 60s, we look back like, what just happened? And the opportunities have all evaporated and we don't have a way out.
Yes. Well, you're glowing.
Yes,
and
I am.
I'm sure that our regular listeners probably can just hear the excitement in your voice.
Very
This
much so.
interview is definitely right up your track. And we didn't just talk about money. We talked a lot about risk and how to alleviate some of those risks and what you do with risk. Not all risk is bad. There's good risk and how you deal with that. But I too enjoyed, even though I'm not maybe the money nerd that you and Ann are, I really enjoyed, and I learned a lot as I listened to the interview and spoke with her in this interview. So I think that even the average viewer is going to get a lot out of this. Now, I will warn you all, this episode is a long one. And so you might have to break it into two parts, but we could have asked a whole lot more questions, but we stopped because we were trying to show self-control. But because we've made such a difference, and we were teaching financial classes, right, to other people. And just recently, one of our students was telling me something that had happened in their financial life. And I have to say, I was a little excited about the fact, knowing that happened for them because they took our class and we talked about it. And it made a difference in their life now, but it's going to make an even bigger difference in the future of their family. And that was super exciting to me. So it's kind of fun to think about those years that we've now sort of turned the boat and all ships are rising here. Can you share with our listeners and viewers what's one or two things that maybe made a difference? For me, it was reading a couple of books, Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki and Think and Grow Rich were books that made a difference. But for you, what's made a difference and what's made an impact on the bottom line for us?
Oh my gosh, one or two. I'm not going to stop at one or two. You know me.
Well, you're going to have to.
We
don't have that much time today. This is a long interview. They don't want to listen to a really long introduction, too.
I become a voracious reader all things financial. I am a voracious listener of podcasts.
Money podcasts.
Money podcast and related podcasts to that. I am making myself more available, being around other people with the same mindset. And it's really helped improve my thinking about money. And I'm not a lover of money. I just kind of love the idea. How do you plan for a better future? Because it's opportunity cost. Because when you are,
I love money. When you love money, it means that I love what I can do with money to help other people.
I would say loving what you can do, not the money itself. It's a piece of paper, it's a digital currency, but it's what opportunities you can pursue because of it. So it's kind of that whole ball of wax. But I'm also excited about a number of the tools that are out there, the financial tools that are available to the average consumer that weren't there 5-10 years ago. And
absolutely.
And while we talked to Ann, who is a financial advisor, and she brings a lot to the table. She has a lot of experience and can help you really move down that road that hopefully will set you up for a better financial life. There's little things you can do. One of those tools, and again, there's many of I've been using for several years now, is Acorns. It's basically a roundup app. So if I spend 90 cents on an item, it will take the extra 10 cents to get up to 100 or get it to $1, and it will invest it for me. And that has grown substantially over the last several years. And I'm not doing anything. It's just this app off to the side. And that's just one example. And so
it's a great example because that Acorns app, we've referred to a lot of people to that. And it's made a difference to them, even our own kids, right? So how do people find out more about Acorns?
Well, I'm going to definitely put it in the show notes so people can be aware of that.
Okay.
And I have to say with us, it's a little nest egg in case anything happens. It's one of the buckets. And we talked briefly about the buckets during the interview, having different buckets of money. So it's one of those buckets we can go to in case there's any unexpected circumstances. Based on our review, I just want to make one little correction. I was talking about a person that was self-employed, and I said, well, one of the things they can do for retirement is looking into traditional IRAs, Roth IRAs. Actually, they need to look into a solo 401k. If they have any self-employment, that's a means for them to invest in retirement that they might not be able to get because they're not working for an employer that offers a plan.
Right. So let's dive into the interview, and we're going to go plan our next vacation. Oh, the only thing stopping us now is COVID, but at least we have the money to do it.
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay. All right. So whether you feel confident in your finances or you haven't even started thinking about it and you dread it, you're going to get something out of this episode. So check out what we have to say with Intentional Finance, Ann Shubert.
Shelley, I am so excited today. We have with
I could tell.
Ann Shubert. If you do recall, she was on episode 56, From Math to Money. And Ann holds the distinction of being only our second guest that we've had on for a second time. But she is also the first guest that gets to be on our YouTube video as well.
Yes. So, hey, YouTube. Woohoo. All right.
So we agreed to have Ann back on and get some questions from our audience, financial questions, because this is a really important part of our life. And I think many of us take it for granted. I know that there have been parts of our life where we have taken it for granted.
Absolutely.
I recall a story of my father when I first got my first credit card in college. It was only $300 minimum. I mean that was the
You're dating yourself, honey.
Yes, I know. And my father warned me, do not use that. You're going to get yourself into trouble. Well, of course, I knew what was going on, and obviously not. And so we got married, and we just, life happens. We had the day-to-day expenses. And what was probably more problematic that we didn't plan for was the unexpected. And I think we're going to hear a little bit from Ann talking about her own experience in the last couple of months of the unexpected that can really upset our financial situation unless we plan for it accordingly.
Yes.
So Ann, thank you so much for joining us again.
I am really happy to be back. It was so much fun the first time, and I'm looking forward to answering all the questions.
we sent out a message to all of you, our listeners, our viewers, to send in your questions. And so we have some questions from you. And then we have some of our own questions, right? Things that we think are important. And I'll be honest, Bob is really the one that drives the money machine here at our house.
I geek out on it.
You do. I like to geek out on it and pretend that I know what I'm talking about. But this is really important stuff, especially for us women in STEM. And I know that that's your platform, Anne, and that's why I love to talk with you about this stuff, is because you really have a great way of connecting with women in STEM and helping them with their finances. But I know this first question is going to just like start us off big, and because it's all about risk, right? And so let's start off. Let's go deep with this hard question from a friend, Brad, a listener, Brad. And he says, why do financial advisors recommend de-risking a retirement portfolio as a person gets closer to retirement? Would it not be better to maintain the portfolio a little on the risky side to take advantage of the upswings of the market? So interesting question, especially because what's been happening in the market these days for us anyway. So I can't wait to hear your answer.
Yeah, no, that's actually a great question. That's a really good question.
Yeah.
And so if we talk for just a minute about what people mean when they talk about risk in investments. Most of the time what people in the investment world are talking about is volatility, right? Or your investments in the stock market going up and down. There's of course other risks, like you might actually, buy swampland in Florida and lose all your money. So things that are really speculative, you could lose all of your money. But the stock market is more about being able to ride up the ups and downs that are considered sort of risky. And so there's two things that are related, two parts to risk when you're investing. One of them is actually your personal risk tolerance, right? Your ability to sleep at night. Are you going to call up your financial advisor or get online at 2 a.m. and sell everything because the market has dropped so much you can't stand it? That is a problem because the markets only work for you if you stay invested. So that's a kind of personal risk tolerance that I always worry about with clients, right? Is their sleep at night. But the whole idea of adjusting your risk as you get closer to retirement has to do with the other part of risk, which is your capacity for risk or your time horizon, right? So if you're 30 years old and you're putting money away for retirement, you're not going to need it for 25 if you're an early retirer, 30, 35 if you're not. You have plenty of time to ride out market ups and downs, because one of the things you don't want to do, you don't want to sell when your investments are down in the market, because the market will come back eventually. And that's the way your plan is set up. So there's two reasons you might sell, right? That first reason, I'm panicking, I can't sleep at night, I'm going to sell. That doesn't help you. But the other reason you might sell is, what if you're in retirement? So now you're actually taking money out of your investments. You're living on your investments, right? You need that money on a regular basis. So if the market is way down and all you have is stocks that are way down, you're going to be forced to sell and not get the benefit of the long-term performance of the market. So that's what the whole idea of sort of de-risking as you get closer to retirement is all about. It's about your time horizon for needing the money. Now, on the other hand, de-risking, you should not be completely unrisking, right? Unless if you have millions and millions and millions of dollars and you're spending a very tiny bit of it, you don't have to be in the stock market, remember. But if you need the money, you need it to provide you with income during retirement, you absolutely want to keep a fair amount of it in the stock market. The stock market is historically the only place that you can really beat inflation. So while you should adjust your risk, you really don't want to be just getting completely unrisked. So it's those upswings. Yes, you want to catch some of them with some of your money. You also want to have money waiting for you when you need it. So there's a couple, there's ways of looking at how to set all that up. You can do buckets where you have a year's worth of need in cash and 3 to 5 years in bonds and the rest in the stock market. It's all a very personal analysis in the end. But that's really the point behind de-risking as you get into retirement is your capacity to take on a big drop in the stock market has gone down because you need the money now.
Right. You can't decide when to pull it out. You need to be pulling it out,
Right.
whether it's up or down or wherever it's at.
Right.
Interesting.
And you need to be consistent because when COVID came along and the same thing happened back when the mortgage crisis in 2008, 2009, people panicked. They pulled it out at the wrong time. People that were nearing retirement or were in retirement, and they lost the ultimate value of what they had invested. And I knew a lot of these people. And like with COVID, the market bounced back pretty quickly, and the returns have been phenomenal.
Yeah, a lot quicker than I thought it would. Yeah, so that's the whole point of dollar cost averaging, right? Am I right with that? That over time you should be investing consistently throughout time?
Well, no, that's related, but that's different in the respect that when you put money in the market, and that's the value of having somebody with Ann working alongside you, is that you need to have the confidence that the market's going to rebound, and that if there's a drop in the market, you immediately don't panic and pull everything out. And then all of a sudden next month it's higher than when you pulled it out. So it's just,
Okay.
The problem with getting out of the market is, when do you get back in?
Right.
That's the big problem. If you look at statistics, it's amazing. I don't have the numbers right at the top, but you miss a few days of the best performing days of the market, at least historically. The market's been pretty volatile recently, but historically you miss a few days of the best performing days and your returns drop dramatically. You've got to be able to stay in the market long enough to have it work for you, whatever market you're in. Stocks, you got to be in more like at least plan for 5 years, preferably more like 8 years before you need the money out of the market. Market happens to go up. You might be able to take some out in 4 years, 2 years, but you can't count on it. So you can't plan on it.
I was just talking yesterday with a young professional, and he was telling me that he had invested $100 in a certain stock about a month ago, just because he had read about it and he thought, oh, this sounds interesting. I'm going to put $100 in it. He didn't leave it there for very long, but last week he pulled it back out to put it in something else. And the day after he pulled it out, Elon Musk texted the name of the stock he tweeted it on Twitter. And apparently the value went up something like 190%. So his $100 investment would have made him $19,000 had he just waited a week or a day. Anyway, you hear those stories, right? Those tragic stories of like, oh my goodness. I'm curious though, when I think about Brad's question, and thank you, Brad, that was a really great question. It brought more questions to my mind. One of the things I want to ask you, Ann, is as a woman in STEM who's married, we have this marriage, right? How does my risk get impacted over time, and the difference between men and women? And I realize I'm kind of putting you on the spot with this, but do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think if we look very broadly at the statistics about women and women's financial lives, just in a very general sense, women make less than men do. They tend to stay out of the workforce longer if there are children or family, or there are, aged parents or other dependents that need to be taken care of. This is all statistics, right? It doesn't mean that a given situation it's going to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, and then they also live longer. So overall, women are generally in not as good a position when it comes to their own retirement. And they can also be, if there is something like a divorce that happens, they can also come out of it not as well. There are statistics, again, I don't have them off the top of my head, but that show that typically women are worse off financially on average after a divorce than their male partners. it's important for women to take care of themselves. It's important for everyone to take care of themselves. But in a situation where you're coming from a bit behind, right? You haven't been paid as much, and you haven't had as many work. Maybe your Social Security isn't as high as your husband's. It's just important to go through some of the what ifs. I mean, hopefully nobody's staring at the possibility of a divorce, but you may be. And what happens if something happens to your partner, right? They pass away suddenly, which you weren't expecting. You know, all of those kinds of risks, those are also risks, right? Unknown things that could happen. And taking a look and trying to figure out how to cope with them, both from just simply becoming maybe a little more educated yourself about things, having a plan. It doesn't mean things are impossible for women at all, not at all. It does mean it's just, it pays you back to pay attention.
Absolutely. Interesting. Anything else on that, Bob, before we move on to the second question that somebody sent in?
Well, I think a couple of things I want to quickly mention is Anne mentioned buckets. And so I think back to the big drop in the market in March, that a lot of people were not in a position, they did not have a lot of buckets. So they pulled out the nearest thing they had available to, which was stocks, equities. And so we've set ourselves up as having different buckets. So if you're in a volatile market, there's another place to go to until that market corrects itself. And as far as the unexpected circumstances that may happen with, as you're talking about yourself, I try to push you a little bit and keep you informed what's going on, because if anything should happen to me, at least there's a plan out there that you're aware of it, versus coming into it completely blind. And then now what I do, and there's a lot of people that are out there that could easily take advantage of you. So it's really important for any woman to, or male, vice versa, if whoever has the
communication,
right? Whoever,
communication
about your finances. You don't have to be in it, the detailed part, but at least have a general understanding of it. So you're educated enough. So if somebody comes alongside you and tries to sell you something doesn't sound right, you at least have that background, knowing where you stand.
That is another element too. On average, it's not the woman who takes care of the finances. And so, yes, there's always stories, or, you know, the woman often will live longer, right? So she's widowed, and now all of a sudden she doesn't even know, you know, what's where and who gets what and how to get into any of the accounts or anything like that. So it's very important. It's funny, in my family, of course, it's the opposite, because I handle all of the financial stuff. But, you know, having that list of, okay, here are all of the things we own. Here's all the login credentials. Here's how to get here. Here's the bills I pay regularly, or at least here's my bill pay, right? You can log into the bank and see the bill pay, right? Where they're all set up. Yeah. So that kind of just basic financial cleanliness or tidiness, right? And financial hygiene.
Yes.
Of keeping everybody in the loop on how the household runs is also something that's important, part of risk management. If something should happen to someone, how would the other person manage?
Excellent.
Absolutely. Well, let's take a look at our second question. It comes from, I don't have permission to share her name, but it starts with an E, so we'll just call her E. She says, I should probably have asked this question earlier in my financial life. I'm 62 years old and have always been self-employed. I've never paid self-employment tax. So as I understand it, I haven't been paying into my Social Security fund. I have basically been living month to month without accumulating much in savings. How would you advise someone in my situation to take care of herself financially as I grow older? It kind of feels like I'll just have to keep working my whole life. This is interesting.
That's a hard one.
That is a hard one.
That is a really hard one. I mean, I guess what I would say is, yes, you know, you have to have income of some kind to live on. And so continuing to have some kind of employment will be necessary. And the only ways to look, are there family members, right, who could help out, or a situation where you could potentially take care, you know, move in with and take care of an elderly relative, you know, who's older than you are, in exchange for, you know, so there's ways to look at other living circumstances. You definitely want to make sure that you're not entitled to any kind of pension from a spouse or an ex-spouse that maybe has passed away, or you were divorced. Make sure that you've checked into all of the benefits you might be entitled to. For example, Social Security, you might be entitled to even an ex-spouse's Social Security payments, even if you didn't pay in yourself. Other than that, I would say sort of looking at the kinds of work that you could do for a long time, even when you get older. I mean, I have a client who is 80 and was still working until recently, doing online sort of accounting and that kind of stuff for her company. I think she's still working for them. In fact, there are types of income generating activities that you could potentially be able to do as you get older. But yes, there isn't really a great answer there, other than if you can save now in your 60s and 70s, try to do that. I mean, don't give up. If you live to 90, you've still got 30 years, and so savings now, invested probably fairly conservatively, per our de-risking when you get into retirement, you're not that far from needing the money. But if you can save anything now, don't think that that's not worth something. That would be the recommendation I would have. But yes, that's a difficult place to be in, because the time, right, has gotten away from you.
Absolutely. So I'm thinking too, just as an entrepreneur myself, E doesn't say what kind of work that she's doing, but I would think that she should also look at opportunities to save money, maybe even doing some radical things, like what's her living situation look like, and could she radically change the way that she's living and still maintain, her happiness, but also be able to use that and find a way to have more savings, especially if she's living month to month. Like, what else can be done at this point? And I do also think that in midst of COVID and this pandemic, there are a lot of online work opportunities. And maybe she could take a look at that. Maybe a career from my career perspective, right? Like, maybe it's not too late maybe she loves what she does, but can she manage it and maybe take on something in addition that's going to provide her some stability and at least some money to set aside for herself for the future, to have some record of paying into the system in some way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, those were other things too. I mean, the whole idea of they're going to be hiring a whole bunch of contact tracers. And I thought, this is exactly the kind of thing you'd be looking for right now. But yes, and of course, saving now means spending less, right? On things. So yes, absolutely. Looking at your expenses, taking a hard look at what you're spending, cutting those down in any way that you can. If you do some kind of planning for that and kind of see what that savings could do for you, that could help with the motivation to go ahead and make that change to your lifestyle now. That's the other thing, is to work with someone that can say to you, if you could save this much, look how much money there would be for you in 15 years when you're 77. That could be helpful in motivating those changes.
Absolutely. I think about our friend Wally, who we helped with a lot of his life, especially in his elderly years. And the realization when we found out, he had nothing in savings. And, it was like, what were you expecting to work your entire life? Like, how were you going to care for yourself? And I think we kind of deny the fact that, eventually all of us come to a point where we probably aren't going to be able to work, and we need to deal with that and plan for that.
Well, we need to plan for our health issues, because for many of us, those are going to increase as we get older. I was thinking about, as far as this, E is 20 or 62 years old. And so there's a point in your life, I'm looking more for happiness And so the one recommendation I would make, whatever your job situation, hopefully you are in a job or you're doing work that you love. If not, and I know it's kind of a juggling thing as far as how much money you can make to survive and all that, but find a place where you're happy, because there's a lot of people out there that are working in careers, jobs that are miserable. And it's just a drudgery to get up every morning and go through the same thing. So I think for your own health, mental, physical, your well-being, is to find a position, the type of work that you're going to really enjoy if you have to work longer than you intended to originally.
Yeah, 100. I agree with that 100%. And, and I would say that that's a great statement for someone who's 62 and going to work a long time, but it's also a good statement or a good consideration for anybody who is, having to get up and go do something that they don't want to do. That can have dramatic effects on your health. Even if you're a younger person, that's important to consider, that there's a value to loving what you do to generate that income.
Absolutely. And on our first interview of you, we talk about how you made that career transition along those lines. So if people are just watching and listening for the first time, you want to go back to that episode and hear a little bit about Anne's background. And that first episode really was all about you, Anne. And we wanted to focus the second episode on the questions that people have. And so fantastic. Anything else? Anybody have anything to add to E's dilemma here? Just want to encourage her that it's not over till it's over, right? And so keep working at it, and it's never too late.
There's one thing that jumped out, and maybe how she wrote it wasn't exactly what I'm thinking, but she says, "I've never paid self-employment taxes." I hope she has, because there is a requirement. It's certainly lesser than what you would be paying as a W-2 employee. Right. So if you haven't paid any self-employment taxes, I would advise you to reach out to a tax accountant, someone like Anne, to help you through this. So.
Yeah. And sometimes entrepreneurs, we can't, we don't want to spend money on those hard things. I was just here in New Mexico, NMSU, New Mexico State University, offers the Arrowhead Center. And there are lots of great advisors on there, and it's fairly easy to get in there and get access to some of those advisors. So if you are looking for some advisors in that way, but I would absolutely also encourage you to go out and look for a financial advisor. I think that we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, right? Yeah. All right. So third question from our listener, Liz. And Liz says, we go from these two retired folks to this young person. So what she says is, as a young woman in STEM, just beginning my career, should I be holding separate investments from my spouse? Where do I even get started with investments? Because up until now, I've been surviving as a poor college student. We finally have 2 professional incomes with some loans to pay off and would like to find a home. What are your recommendations? What do you think, Anne?
So there's 2 questions in there, right? One very specific, right? Should I hold separate investments from my spouse? And then there's kind of the giant financial planning 101 question, which I love. So let me get the first one, a response to the first question out of the way. In a general sense, you're really talking about mostly estate planning, legal questions if you were to end up getting divorced or separated. First off, I don't give legal advice. I give legal aware financial advice. And it really does depend on specific circumstances. In a very broad sense, one of the things that matters is whether you live in a community property state or not. Right? If you are in a community property state, everything that you earn during your marriage is going to be considered equal should something happen and you divorce. In that circumstance, it can be beneficial to keep separate accounts if you have funds like an inheritance or something you brought into the marriage. So there's an area there where keeping things separate can be beneficial in a situation where it would otherwise be considered community property. On the flip side, holding assets jointly in investment accounts can sometimes enable you to set the account up to transfer easily if one spouse should pass away. So for example, you're talking about buying a house, but if you title a home, joint with rights of survivorship, it makes the transition of the assets to a surviving spouse very easy. However, retirement type accounts like a 401k at work or IRA accounts, those cannot be held jointly. They have to be held in individual names. As with many folks, those are kind of the real focus of your savings. It may not really come up because each of those accounts has to be held in an individual's name. So again, that's a kind of a question for either an estate planning attorney or a financial advisor about your specific circumstance.
Okay.
So then let's talk about, where do I even get started? First thing I want to say is congratulations for even thinking about it. Yay.
Yes. Yay, Liz, you're planning, you're thinking about the future. This is good.
You're ahead of the pack right
Yes.
now in the fact that you're thinking about it. So what you want to do is you want to come up with a plan. All right. What are the elements of a plan? Well, the first thing you need to figure out is, where are you right now? Awareness of everything. And maybe you're already doing this, but step number one in financial planning is, what is my income? What do I spend money on, right? What's my cash coming in? What's my cash going out? Understanding that, knowing where your money is going. The second part of that is knowing where what you have, how much what you already have is. And you may not have a whole lot, but it's assets, right? Bank accounts, maybe it's investment accounts. I had somebody the other day, she's not a client, just somebody that I had an hour-long free, consultation with.
Mm-hmm.
And she has a 401k from Apple, and she's not really sure what's in there. And I'm like, if it's Apple stock, it might be worth a lot more than you think. So just make sure that you know what you have, and then also understand any debts you might have. You mentioned in the question, Liz, that there are some debts loans you need to pay off. Understand them, right? Know what your options are. If they're student loans, perhaps you have different options for payoff. What are the interest rates? And of course, make sure you're making minimum payments. So that's the start of it, is awareness of where you're at. Then the other part is, at the very beginning, is goals. And the goals could be concrete things. You mentioned being interested in looking at a house, right? Buying a home.
Right.
Work together to establish what those goals really are. Make sure that you're clear, you and your spouse, about what that means, right? And maybe you've done all this, but in some cases, some people might think, we're moving to the Pacific Northwest, and other people might think I'm buying a home here in Albuquerque or wherever you live. Make sure that you start working on, what are those goals, those specific things, right? How much money are we looking at for a house? How big a house? Are we planning to have kids? So just start fleshing out the goals. The other part of it to work on a little bit is just sort of having some conversations with your spouse about money. And if you can get into this, and sometimes having a third-party advisor helps, what does money mean to them? This is an interesting and kind of ongoing conversation, right? So all of those parts, right? Specific goals, meaning of money, where am I at? You've got three elements of what I consider kind of clearing the ground, right? You're going to build a house. Let's think of it that way. You're going to build the financial structure that you're going to grow into as your life grows and expands. You will have this protective financial structure around you that is going to keep your life as much on track as we can with things, the way the world works. So the first thing, though, is to clear that ground, have a really clear sense of where you're at, and then have that goal in your mind where you're headed. The next steps, the really firm financial foundation, you need to have an emergency fund. You need to have cash that is somewhere liquid. And yes, it will make you nothing. I have one client who just can't stand the fact that I keep making him have an emergency fund because it's not making anything. It's not supposed to make anything. It's supposed to be there when you need it. So you have to build your emergency fund, and you also want to then look at paying off debt, right? High interest rate debt like credit cards, you're giving money away. This is not the way to succeed. And the other point is, though, how do you balance that, right? If you take all your money and you pay down your credit cards, but you don't have anything in an emergency fund, the emergency comes back and now it's back on the credit cards, right? So there's a balance there. And it really depends. It's personal, but figure something out and pick something, right? How much savings, if you can just pay off credit card debt and save for your emergency fund, great. How big an emergency fund? Again, it's very personal, but sit down and think about what could go wrong. How stable is your job? You don't own a house at this point, so you don't have to worry about the water heater blowing up. But just think about what are the bad things that could happen. Get yourself some chocolate or a beer, or whatever makes you feel good. Sit down and think about the bad stuff that might happen. And then think about how much money it would be nice to have if that happened to you, right? So emergency fund, liquid savings account, maybe a money market, not a CD unless it's like 3-month CD, because you can't get out of it without getting a penalty. Build your emergency fund. Then pay down debt. So what should you pay down? High rate credit cards, that's a no-brainer.
Right.
Student loan, it begins to depend on the interest rates. And it depends on whether you think there might be some student loan forgiveness coming with the new administration and what your income is, whether you might qualify for it. So that's kind of a little twist. Once you buy your house, a lot of people like to pay down their mortgages, and this becomes personal, right? So depends on interest rates, how much you could make. It's a personal kind of decision. But whatever you do, talk about it together, come up with a plan, set that out. So you've done your cash flow, you know how much money you have to save. Now you've decided, I'm going to use it to save for my emergency. I'm going to use it to pay off my debts. Which debts? And now hopefully there's something left for saving for those future goals. Because in the end, my clients that are doing just fine, they spend less than they earn. That's it. That is the one secret to financial security. Spend less than what you earn, save the rest. It doesn't matter whether you invest in the most perfect thing or the best stock or what, save. So that goal, now sit down with those and figure out what, you mentioned thinking about buying a home. So let's assume you've talked and you figured out you kind of want to buy one here for about this much money and all of that. Think about the down payment and start figuring out how you can save for the down payment for that. But at the same time, you do want to start worrying about your retirement, right? Unfortunately, it would be better not to be the person who at 62 doesn't have anything, because at some point you will want to stop working, probably. The money you make now, you will live on when you stop working. So not everything that you make now should be spent now, right? You have to put some of it away. Now, because you can make money off of your investments, that money can come and earn you. You don't have to split it, half 50-50. You just have to save enough that when it is invested over that long period of time, it will then be there for you when you need it. One of the things I will say is be very sure if you have a retirement plan at work that matches, that is free money.
Yes.
Don't let that go away, right? Try very, very hard. Don't go putting money on credit cards to do it, but try very hard to start by getting that free money and saving at least as much as gets you the match. And then set your plan up, pay attention, and revisit periodically. So I've gone on and on, but this is what I do for clients. This is it.
Help come up with the plan of what's going to take you forward and make sure that you don't get to the end or you don't get into a crisis or, for us this week, it was a daughter whose radiator went, right? And she's been saving for a car because she's known it's coming, but at what point, luckily for her, she's not in a true emergency. There are true emergencies and risks. So I know you have something that you want to say. He's dying to jump in here.
Okay, I geek out about this, and I love a lot of the stuff you're saying, but I have these other things I want to add in just because I'm so I get crazy about this. So one of Liz's comments, she talks about, should I be holding separate investments from my spouse? And so what I thought of, and I appreciate your comment about the community property state and what you have before you come into marriage is yours. And the whole thing is, if you're going to do some investments, don't hide it from your spouse. Don't find out that the male usually makes the stupid decisions. I'm going to take our money and invest $40,000 in this. You can't lose stock, and all of a sudden it evaporates overnight. So make sure you are honest. Talk to your spouse saying, I want to make this investment. What do you think about this? Let's talk about the risk. It's all about risk mitigation, all that. Second is with the house, I take it a step further that you're looking to buy a house. And a couple of things with that. Number one, when you're out there looking, don't necessarily listen to the real estate agent of what they say you can afford.
Yeah, or the mortgage company. Don't believe them. We did that. We made that mistake, didn't we? Yes.
Be conservative, pay less than what they're saying, because those unexpected things in life, the furnace breaks down, the water heater explodes.
Or you're living on two incomes and then decide, hey, one of us wants to stay home with our kids.
Yep.
Now, how do we make that work?
And you're not leaving that runway as far as to be investing in retirement. And the other thing I would say, is this your dream house, or are you looking as kind of a stepping off point? Maybe can you look at what a lot of people call house hacking? Could you bring in a roommate to help offset some of the mortgage costs? Could you maybe buy think bigger, let's buy a duplex, have somebody else live in one of it and help offset the mortgage cost. But as far as the retirement comment, and I'm rambling,
I want to say what you're just saying, but that goes also back to E and her, at 62, you could do the same thing. Yes. House hack. You could get creative, because a lot of times our housing is one of the most expensive investments that we make. So get creative with that. But
well, even with E in that, I would think about how any money I'm bringing in, where can I put it in an IRA? There's all these vehicles, but I agree wholeheartedly with Ann talking about, start thinking about your retirement, putting this away, even if you don't have it. And when Ann talked about having the match, that's part of your compensation package. You're basically saying, we don't want your money, so it's free money. Take advantage of that. And if you're not in a job where they have a plan, invest in an IRA. You have the traditional IRAs, you have the Roth IRAs. And the thing that we didn't mention, you talked about a parent or one of the parents maybe staying home with your children. I think there's this natural tendency, and I certainly suffered from this, is trying to provide our kids with various things along the way, going to camps and all that stuff. And lots of parents will invest in 529 plans for kids to go off to college, and they're focused all on their kids, but then eventually the kids leave the house and they haven't saved for retirement. So put your retirement first, because what's the old cliche? And you're on an airplane.
There are no scholarships for retirement.
Right. Well, I was even thinking, when the mask falls down in the airplane, who do you put the mask on? Do you put it on your companion, or you put it on yourself? You have to take care of yourself first before you can help your kids and other people.
Right.
So.
Well, whether you're helping your kids or an elderly parent or a nonprofit organization that you want to be able to support, right? Yes, you need to get this piece right. And so one other thing about Liz's question that I want to tweak this just a little bit. What if she wasn't married? What if this was her first professional job? She's a young woman. Obviously a lot of what you're saying, Ann, applies the same thing, but I don't think that our young women maybe are taking the time to sit down and make a plan and think about some of these things, which which I would definitely refer them to you, or, to listen to some of these podcasts that are out there, other podcasters that do a great job at just educating and informing and helping them. But any other thoughts on that? If she's a young woman in STEM, I know that this week, one of my friends, I wouldn't call her a young woman in STEM, but she is a woman in STEM. She's a single woman in STEM. And she posted how she had used time during the pandemic to make sure that she raised her credit score. And so, what is it that we need to be thinking about and doing for these women that are on their own?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, other than not having to discuss your goals with anyone else and not having to worry about whether they're off, buying speculative stocks, I think probably all of the steps still apply. You could still be thinking about buying a home. You could still be thinking about wanting to have kids at some point. Perhaps the only thing that I would say is there's a traditional, right? You sort of are spending all your time looking for your mate. And then when you get married or you find that person, and I would say don't put those two together, right? Don't wait on the finances until you have the other person that's going to be in your life. That would be the thing that I would be concerned about, is somebody sort of, in other words, saying that or saying even, I don't know how to plan because I'm hoping to meet someone and get married. That's what I really want, but I can't make that happen. Okay, that's okay. That doesn't mean you can't, just because you plan for what your life is as a single woman doesn't mean it stays that way. I mean, just because you plan for things as a married couple or you're going to buy a house, that doesn't mean no financial plan ever gets exactly executed. It just doesn't, right? But it gives you something to aim at. It helps you know how to make decisions now. The name of our company is Intentional Finance because that's what we help people do. Become intentional about what they're doing with their money. It doesn't mean it doesn't change. It just means that you've thought about it.
Absolutely. And I think one thing I would say is that maybe you could look for a money mentor as well. Having a financial advisor is great. But I know that our daughters benefit so much from being able to talk to their dad and sometimes to me about these money things, right? That what's important and how to make some of those decisions. Like make sure that you're filling your mind with good material, I guess.
Well, and you're willing to act upon it, because there's a lot of people out there that ask for advice and read books and they don't act upon it. And you need to take that step.
That makes me think of my friend who calls people who ask questions and never act on it. He calls them assholes. Anyway.
That one of the things that I did mention kind of in passing, and it is your money story, right? That you don't have to be married to start digging into that one. My money story was a lot around, if you can buy something, it's okay. Life is okay. And there's, I think we talked about that in the first podcast, but it had to do with, a father who was not employed, a mother who was, and a family of origin where no one ever talked about money at all. And so, as a kid testing the waters, if I knew there were certain things that were too expensive, but if I asked and I got something that was, not the usual run of the mill, a comic book or an ice cream cone, but I asked for something a little bigger and I got it, that must mean there's enough money. So for me, that translated to running up credit cards, in my graduate school and 20s, because if I was anxious, then I would go do that. So that's another area for sure where, anyone in a single or in a relationship, sit down sometime. There are different people you can work with about that, but even you can just explore yourself, right? If you feel anxiety around money, if you feel like your behaviors aren't in your own best interest and yet you're doing them, right? Just sit and think a little. No judgment. Don't yell at yourself and tell yourself you're horrible and you need to change. Just ask. what would happen if I didn't? Why, how does this feel when I do this? And try to dig up a little bit of understanding about yourself and your stories around money, right? Are you someone who isn't supposed to have money? Are you someone who, isn't deserving of money? Are you someone for whom money is status? Are you someone for whom money gives you the power to buy things that make you feel okay? That was kind of me. That's another thing to take into account. Or the earlier you can do this, the better off you're going to be, because then the more rational and functional your decisions around money are going to be, and the less struggling you will have with habits that really and belief systems that don't help you in the long run.
Right. And I think that during this pandemic and the last probably year, a lot of people have had to face some of that and maybe developed some unhealthy spending habits, or hopefully, like my friend who increased her credit score, they've taken the time to sit down and take a look at it and actually used the time as the lever that they needed to make a difference with that.
So you just mentioned the pandemic, and I didn't want to miss this opportunity. Going into the pandemic, there were a lot of people, they were caught off guard. They had not planned financially, and some unfortunate circumstances, people lost businesses, people have been employed for months. And so planning is really important. And so since our last interview with you, something's happened, one of those unexpected things in life. And if you could speak to that, we would really appreciate that.
Absolutely. And I do want to say that, for those who have dealt with, major job losses and this whole pandemic, this really was very hard to plan for. The typical emergency fund is have enough money for 6 months, while you look for another job. When there aren't any jobs, what do you do? This has been an extremely stressful time for quite a number of people. What I had happen personally was stressful. I don't think it rises to the level of what some other folks have gone through, but we had a house fire, November the 15th at 3 a.m. We were woken up by the smoke detectors, and there was smoke in the house. And this is, we live on 9 acres in the East Mountains, and we had built the house custom in 94, so 26 years ago. And yeah, there you are in that movie, a TV show, that episode of reality TV, standing outside with the fire engine spraying water in your house, wearing a barn jacket over a nightgown at 20-degree weather, going, so everybody is fine. It was just me and my husband. We were woken up. If you do not have smoke detectors, buy smoke detectors. If you have smoke detectors, check the batteries.
Yes.
We were able to get all our fuzzy creatures. Nobody was hurt. The fire itself was actually contained to a fairly small area, but it burnt up into the attic and forced smoke and heat throughout the attic, and then smoke throughout the house. And so as it has turned out, it is probably going to take them about 9 months to mostly rebuild the house. Apparently smoke is very caustic or corrosive. So all electrical wiring has to be redone. They have to take all the wallboard down. So things change in an instant, right? And that's the definition of a risk, right? Something you did not expect. You didn't know it was going to happen. You weren't sure. Risks can actually, technically, system engineering, it could be a good thing. It's something you don't know might happen or might not, but most people think of risk as a bad thing. And when you're looking at risk from a sort of scientific system engineering standpoint, there's two parts of it you look at. You look at the likelihood, right? How likely is this bad thing to happen? And then the impact. How bad would it be if it did happen? And there's actually this sort of risk matrix that you look at, and you put the boxes, or, some of the risks are low and medium and then high, and you want to address all the high risks if you have a program, right, that you're developing. And what's interesting is things that have a very low likelihood. I mean, having a house fire is not that common. It does happen,
Right.
but the impact is very high, right? And so you want to make sure in your life that you're taking a look at any risk, even if it's something that's not likely to happen. If it has a high impact on you, then you should be dealing with it somehow. This is what, maybe your job loss, your job is pretty secure, but you might lose your job. Maybe there's a pandemic. That one was hard to put enough money away for, but that's what your emergency fund is for. Risks that may be very common, right? Your water heater is going to blow up once every 2 years or something. But even the ones that are not as likely, but the impact is very high. So, what can you do with a risk in your life, right? Well, you can accept it. That's one choice. And this is, again, system engineering. You can do 4 things with risk. You can accept it. Say, fine, I'll take that impact right on the chin. Well, when it comes to your house, probably a bad idea. Unless, what if I had $500 million in the bank? Don't care, right? I could rebuild my house. You can avoid the risk. You can avoid the risk of having a house fire by not owning a house. I mean, that's true. You can mitigate the risk. Well, we did that. Smoke detectors. That's a mitigation. It makes the impact of the risk a little less, or it makes the odds of the risk happening a little less. Right? So you might clear brush from around your house to prevent a wildfire from getting to your house. The smoke detectors are a mitigation. And the last thing you can do is transfer it. Well, that's what homeowners insurance is. And luckily, we have a wonderful agent and we have Farmers Insurance, and I'm going to pitch them because they have been amazing. And you want to have, if you have a mortgage on your home, you're required to have the homeowners insurance. But it's also very important when you do that transfer, that major impact, you don't want to be surprised by what your homeowner's insurance covers if you actually have to make a claim. Or if, like us, we're sitting in the back of the paramedic ambulance calling at 5 a.m., calling the 24-hour number at Farmers and find out that, yes, we actually, by 7 o'clock, we have a place to stay in town with 2 dogs and 2 cats. So homeowners insurance, talk a little bit about that. There are 3 things a homeowner's insurance is going to cover. Generally, this is all very broad and there's a lot of different moving parts, but generally you're going to cover the structure, right? Actual structure of the house. That's everything that's fixed, right? Your flooring, if it's carpeting, if it's installed and all that. You want to make sure that you have replacement value on that. When we built our house, it cost a certain amount. We have all the plans and everything. It is going to cost 3 times as much to rebuild it. Now, it's been 26 years, but it's going to be covered, right? So you want to be very careful that you have replacement cost on your home and make sure that you understand whether some outbuildings or other structures are covered. You also want to make sure, if not just fire, but I had one client, I looked over their policy and they had an exclusion for hail damage to their roof. And they didn't know what was in there, right? So yes, these things are horrible, but read your policy, read it. Or talk to your agent, write a bunch of notes, write down their name and the date that you talked to them and all the stuff they told you. Make sure you understand what is covered and what's excluded, and make sure you're comfortable with that, right? What are the odds of hail damage in New Mexico? Well, they're not 0. They're not 0. Next thing it will cover is your contents, right? So your contents are separate. Most of the time, that's a percentage of the total value of the structure. So another reason to get replacement cost, right? The value of your policy will go up each year as things increase with inflation. So will the value of your contents. Usually it's a percent of the total value of your policy. Contents, there are exclusions. Make sure everything you own is covered. If you have a gun collection, if you have antiques, there's a lot of things that won't be covered under sort of normal content. So make sure that everything you own that you care about, if the fire destroys your whole house, that the things you have will be covered. You maybe have to buy a rider on the policy, or you may even have to buy a separate policy to cover like fine art or something like that. And then the last thing it should cover is your living expenses if you have to vacate your house. We are living in a rental home in Northeast Heights, which the insurance company is paying for. Again, that's typically a percentage of the total amount. And our house has appreciated over the years. And so we are being put up in a very lovely rental home, and will be for the 9 months that it's going to take. They will pay mileage back and forth to drive to our house to take care of my horses that are still there. They are paying for someone to go out and feed my horses when I can't be there in the evenings. So you want to make sure you understand the policy that you have and that it covers the things you expect it to and that you need it to. And then lastly, anything like this happens, insurance, I mean, your life is probably going to cost more. So now we're back to the emergency fund, right? Where those unexpected things that you can't cover, right? So the key thing here about risk is, even if it's doesn't seem like it's very likely, if the impact of that risk actually happening to you, that can derail everything. That can derail your whole financial plan. So think about the way to avoid or mitigate or transfer by insurance. So that's my long-winded version of what you do before you have a house fire. Get good insurance.
Yeah. Absolutely. It all comes back to planning, right? And to being aware and to taking the time. And I just want to say from STEM Southwest podcast that we're thankful that you and your husband and all of your furry friends were safe after that. But I do know that it's a radical disruption in your life. And so thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your wisdom, because life goes on, but somehow you have to figure out how to pick up the pieces amidst this, already crazy time, and add a house fire on top of it. I can't imagine. So thank you.
It added to the pandemic experience. That for sure. But we're very blessed that we came out of it, and we will come out of it okay.
Well, I think sometimes those are life-defining moments when you're faced with near death. I mean, let's face it, that's what happened, right? Like, had those smoke alarms not gone off. And so it kind of helps us with those priorities of, what do I need to get right? And what do I need to invest time in when these really life-changing situations happen? So
I've been telling everybody that it's something really small that could literally save your life.
So we are a STEM-based podcast, and I'm assuming you don't advise your clients just with pieces of paper, that there's probably a lot of technology going on behind the scenes they may not see. And maybe could you give a little summary or something, share about what that looks like behind the scenes for you?
Actually, almost everything we do now is online. I mean, we can do, we have a custodian that holds the money. It's TD Ameritrade, soon to be Schwab. I have, everything is online with them and interacting with them. I can do everything with electronic signatures, almost everything. Every now and then they get a little grumpy about something, but everything can be done online. So that's another thing about the pandemic, realizing that I can work with people kind of anywhere in the country because we can really do things over Zoom. But technology that I use, there's a lot of basic stuff of note-taking and keeping track of clients, but there's probably a couple of programs that I use, applications that I use with clients that add real distinct value, and would be things that would be hard to do, hard for a do-it-yourselfer to do. The first one is actually a program called Riskalyze. We've been talking a lot about risks and how do I decide, right, what kind of portfolio to put, invest my clients in, or to recommend if I'm just doing a financial plan. So this program is it's cool because it looks at, again, it's looking at the volatility, the up and down part of risk, and it's looking at the performance that you would get in terms of the next 6 months, and what's the 95% probability that your performance would be a certain amount, fall in some range, right? Your investments could go up to 20% and down 15. And I'm making those numbers up, but they will give, what they have is they do a questionnaire. So I can send my clients an electronic questionnaire that they just simply make choices, and I can put in the amount of their portfolio. Let's say they have $200,000. I can put that in and it will show them different choices. Well, what if pick where you want to be, pick what's comfortable to you. What if your portfolio looked like this 6 months from now? What if it looked like that? And what I love about it is that it gives people the chance, it kind of gives you choices, and it picks out whether somebody is a little more risk, they want more, they keep picking a little more risk and they're willing to, a little more return rather, and they're willing to take a little more risk for it. Or if they kind of go, yeah, no, I don't want extra return, I'll stick over here. So they come back and tell me the information about what their risk tolerance is, right? This is their sleep at night risk tolerance. And then the program also has a database in the background where I can then put in my actual portfolio, the actual holdings I'm using for them, and I get a risk number and I can match it all up. It's important. It gives me some confidence that we have a good starting point. But any kind of risk assessment, people can be wrong. Their risk level tolerance can go up and down depending upon how they're feeling at that day or that month or that year. So I stay in touch with my clients. If when the market dropped dramatically in March, I called everybody and talked to everybody, make sure everybody was okay with what was going on. So it's a starting point, but it's also something that is really, really important to understand your own risk tolerance. The other piece of software I use, and pretty much everybody these days does financial planning, is use some kind of software. It's called Money Guide Pro. And what it does is the planning part of, we set up goals and I put in your resources, what you have, what you're willing to save. And the software does two things that are just lovely. First off, it takes into account all of the little details, taxes and inflation and ups and downs of the market and all of that. And so it does that, and it makes a projection then and comes back and says, you have this probability of success meeting your goals with the resources that you're applying. That probability is underlying, it's called a Monte Carlo. And then basically the software runs 1,000 different market behaviors, because if the market drops the first couple of years you retire, it's called sequence of returns risk, you're going to have less chance of living and having enough money to the end of your life than if the market is dramatically up at the beginning, even if it averages the same. So doing things with average returns isn't the best. And so these kinds of tools, these kinds of financial planning tools, give you the chance to do this statistical analysis. It just gives you a little more confidence that you're in a zone that has a good chance of success. And so those are probably the two main pieces of technology that I use right now. I'm looking at some other, something that will scan and read in tax returns, just literally scan them in and be smart enough to pull all the data out. But those are probably the two main ones right now that I use. Then they're things that, we pay money to use them on a professional level. And so they would be a little hard to replicate anywhere else on your own as a do-it-yourselfer.
Well, I don't think it's any secret that Bob and I think that everyone should have a financial advisor. And so whether it's you, Ann, or someone else, we want to encourage all of our listeners and viewers to reach out and get that process started. So as we wrap up today, if people have further questions or they want to sign up and just chat with you for a little bit of time, how does that work? And can you tell us how they can get hold of you?
Absolutely. So, I offer free, no obligation 1-hour meetings. Anybody who would like to just simply talk to me on a Zoom call or a phone call. These days, I'm not really working from the office at this point, except for existing clients. We can set that up. You can go to the website. You can shoot me an email and I will send you back a link to my scheduler, my online scheduler, and you can pick a good time for you. I generally make appointments Tuesday Wednesday and Thursday, usually kind of 10 or 11 in the morning until later. I do have appointments later in the evening, late afternoon, evening. And yeah, we just talk. I can answer questions. If it sounds like it might make sense for you to work with me, we can talk about that and how that all works. Or you can just simply ask me a whole bunch of questions and I answer them, because I feel like it's important for people to have access to information that may be a little bit hard to put all together yourself. So that's, come through the website, shoot me an email, or give me a call, and we'll set something up.
Wonderful. So Intentional Finance. Just want to thank you, Anne, for being with us today. And as always, it's a pleasure, and we're excited. I think that just one clarifier, we have listeners and viewers from all over the world. But I expect that you are limited in terms of who you can answer anyone's questions, I suppose, right? But when there's actually, if someone wants to set up a partnership and work with you professionally as a financial planner, they have to be in a certain place, or does it matter? How does that work?
Yeah, they do need to be in the US, and I will need to sort of pay attention if they need to be a permanent resident of the US somehow.
Okay.
For me to be able to work with them. And honestly, for people that are not US residents, I really would hesitate to give any kind of advice other than maybe that very broad financial planning advice, because, all of these things I talk about, a Roth IRA or how your homeowners insurance works or any of that it's all very specific to the US. So, while I'd love to chat with somebody from the UK or France or wherever they call from, I would be very hesitant to give financial advice to someone that wasn't a resident of the United States.
Sure. Well, I appreciate that. I just want to throw that in because as well as money well invested has exponential impact on your life. Podcasts well invested, as ours has shown lately, our listeners and viewers have increased exponentially. And so we are not just serving the Southwest. People are interested for sure in things that are happening in the Southwest, but we are reaching a lot broader audience. So I wanted to make sure that was clear to people. Yeah. And whatever you decide, listeners and viewers, just make sure that you get a plan together, whether that's with yourself or with a spouse or a friend or, preferably a certified financial planner.
And a lot that we've discussed today, while they may be international, it's transferable to country as far as planning and saving and all these
some of those basics, risk. Like the 101 that Anne talked about, like those financial planning 101. So anyway, all right, well, we're going to wrap it up for today. And just thank you again, Anne, for joining us. And we will see you again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me back.
Hey there, this is Shelley, and I am so glad that you have stopped by STEM Southwest. Can I ask a favor? If you've gotten some value out of our episodes, if you are just powered by nerd power and are excited about what we're doing, or if you're new to us and you've got just an interest, subscribe now to help us grow by doing that. Then take a moment and give us a review on iTunes or your favorite podcast player, because we could use your support and help. We are trying to raise up an army of STEM Southwest supporters. And then last, think about sharing our podcast with your friends, your families, or even complete STEM strangers, because, it's all about making the world a better place and having more STEM rock stars highlighted and connected. Stop by our website if you're looking for resources, and you're going to find a lot of things that's going to grow over time. So continue to stop on in and join us. Subscribe now and support STEMSW.com.
You've been listening to the STEM Southwest podcast. Nerd on, fellow STEM nerds.